Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Adam Lang. There's plenty happening in the world of media right now, with a federal election a couple of months away. Prepare for a surge in campaign advertising, including on digital media, where a lot of the normal rules don't apply. We've also got another player in the TV streaming space, a big data play by the ABC, and a brand new budget to talk about. Tim Burrowes was the founder of Mumbrella and now the proprietor of media and marketing industry newsletter Unmade. Tim, it's great to have you back. Welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Adam, great to be with you. And when you say it aloud, it does sound like there's a lot happening, doesn't it?
It does. There's plenty to roll off the tongue. Let's start with the budget. Tim, you've looked at how that'll impact the media and marketing space. What did you find?
Well, look, there are a few sort of indirect things, I suppose. Probably for the media companies and the wider kind of media and marketing industry, more winners than losers. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting was the tax offset, the 120% tax offset for going digital and training. Now, for an industry that had a pretty tough couple of years of it, and the events world, that's a bit of a bonus if it sends people back towards face-to-face training. So that was certainly one aspect that was interesting. Another one where you probably see winners around the digital side of things is web development. So the first $100,000 spent on that going digital, including, for instance, updating a website or even, going online for the first time, that again will be tax deductible at that 120% rate. So whether in practice that means that web developers all put up their prices by 20%, we'll have to see. But that's definitely a winner as well. And then, of course, the digital behemoths are a winner of that sort of thing because they're the ones who provide those cloud-based services like Salesforce or Google's G Suite, all of those things. So a number of measures which are broadly positive for the communications industry. And then one maybe more negative would be, it looks like Screen Australia will have a lot less to spend in terms of grants over the next sort of 3 years or so. But perhaps that's understandable when the screen industry is booming thanks to investment in streaming. So maybe government funding isn't needed as an intervention on that right now.
So it could be finally time for Fear and Greed to get a new website. I'll look at that. Now let's turn to the election, which has to be held in May. Can we expect to see the advertising ramp up soon?
Yeah, it's always swings and roundabouts with an election because on the one hand, government advertising has to go on hold, but on the other, the parties start spending. Now, what tends to happen in the run-up to an election has been happening is government spending does tend to happen with all of these public service announcements, which might just have a little political aspect to them as well, or political motivation. But then we'll see the parties begin to start selling in their communications. And of course, we're increasingly seeing them moving towards social media in how they communicate, their ability to target much smaller groups of people. And of course, that also makes it a lot harder to monitor what they're up to.
A closely fought contest can probably mean a bit more spending. Would you agree?
Look, I would. Of course, it depends on what budgets all of the parties hold. And of course, one of the things that distorts that whole market is the deep pockets of the likes of Clive Palmer, for instance, where, you can't miss those ads on, often on the front pages of the newspapers, but online as well, and those bright yellow billboards, etc. So that tends to, drag more spend into the sector and, of course, drive the cost of advertising up for all of the political parties.
Yeah, now you've mentioned it. There is so much attention on digital media now, but does traditional media advertising still have a big role to play in this campaign?
I suspect it probably does. I think obviously you can't necessarily think of parties as brands, but for kind of overall tone and messages, that's where television works very well, but it's expensive, obviously, where newspapers work very well. And I suppose where digital works best is when you're targeting specific messages to specific groups of people, which, of course, has been in some places around the world has actually been seen as a potential negative for democracy when micro-targeting can converge towards the overly psychological.
Right. Now, traditional and digital also can be subject to different rules. For example, there's a blackout period for political ads in the 3 days leading up to the election, but that typically applies only to traditional media, but not online. I think that could be getting a bit outdated. What about you?
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's certainly something which the traditional media has been fairly unhappy about. They have had a pretty good scorecard of getting most media reforms legislated that they want, but this is one that hasn't happened so far. So, of course, we'll now get to the point where we'll certainly go into this election under the old rules, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's the last one where there isn't a level playing field. Now, whether that is unlocking the blackout period for everybody, or whether it means blacking out all media, we'll have to see. But yeah, it feels just a strange contradiction at the moment.
Yeah, so let's turn to the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Last week, the federal government announced it would, if it was re-elected, increase the powers of the ACMA to crack down on tech companies and the publication of harmful and misleading content. That probably won't be received well by Facebook and the others.
Yeah, look, it's part of an undergoing theme, I suppose. So we're halfway through the 5 years, or the planned 5 years, of the Digital Platforms Inquiry, which is being run by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. This is separate powers that will be given to the, as you say, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Now, of course, it won't get legislated this side of the election now. So it then becomes a question, if there's a change of parties, whether, if, for instance, Labor ended up holding government, whether they would then choose to legislate something similar themselves. I think Facebook and Google already feel in Australia they're very much under the microscope, and they are. And what happens here becomes a kind of global lesson as well. So I must admit, I'm a bit cynical about whether this one will ever be legislated, because it was obviously announced in the clear knowledge that it wasn't going to hit Parliament during this sitting year. And there is a bit of a habit over the years, certainly for the last decade, of both Labour and coalition communications ministers leaving it very late in their term of office before they make their moves, and then running out of time.
So, on that theme, last year, Facebook and Google struck content deals with a lot of the main news publishers in Australia. And last week, more than 30 independent media outlets stopped publishing news for 24 hours as part of the hashtag Waiting on Zuck campaign. They're trying to send a message that small and medium publishers are still waiting for payment for content appearing on Facebook. Do you think that message got through?
Look, I think the message was heard, but whether it will be acted upon is another matter. The issue and the frustration for the smaller end of town was this new position was legislated, which was Google and Facebook could be designated under the News Media Bargaining Code, and then would be forced to negotiate with anybody who is recognised by the ACMA as a news provider. And unfortunately, because then the kind of the backroom deals were done with Google and Facebook to find ways of giving money to the big end of town, they haven't been designated. So the question now is whether the small guys will be left high and dry when it looks like Facebook in particular doesn't want to talk to them. So, there are some odd examples. A very vocal this week has been the likes of Broadsheet, for instance, who finds itself competing with bigger players who are now getting more funding as a result, but also organisations like SBS or The Conversation, the Voice of Academics, are the sort of people that Facebook hasn't been willing to talk to. So it does feel like there are at the moment some unintended consequences.
Stay with me, Tim. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Tim Burrowes from media and marketing industry newsletter Unmade. So let's turn to the ABC, and it's currently struggling with how much freedom its journalists should have on social media. It was revealed recently that staff have been disciplined 4 times in the past 6 months for their online conduct. Now, that's as part of a policy to crack down on personal views being posted on platforms like Twitter. Do you think this is one of those stories that Twitter actually worries about and no one else does?
Look, I'm not sure how worried Twitter would actually be about this one. I think it's probably more of a headache for the management of the ABC and in fairness, the management of any team of journalists, where you want, modern media environment for your journalists to actually have a two-way conversation, to show their ability to analyze and understand the issues and explain them. But at the same time, you don't want them to show bias. And this, I think, is the issue and the challenge, which is particularly important for the ABC because it has public funding, is where does expert analysis stop and opinion begin? And every now and then you'll just see an example where a journalist or even a presenter from the ABC, because it's not always journalists, just can't resist the temptation. And then, of course, it's another stick to beat the poor old bosses of the ABC the next time they turn up at Senate estimates.
So, speaking of the ABC, anyone attempting to use iView to watch programs is being warned that they'll need to set up an account. What do you think the ABC is going to do with that data?
I suspect it will use it for entirely benevolent purposes. I'm not among those who feel challenged by the decision to do that. Hey, look, I think for the typical user, the main benefit they'll see is being able to presume watching a show where they left off, which is something that we've come to expect through streaming generally. It does feel like a lot of the criticism of this move and the questions around the kind of protection of data do seem to be coming from the ABC's greatest kind of rivals and critics, particularly over at News Corp. So it does feel that it's quite a narrow group of people who are criticising. So, it strikes me that probably they should have done it long ago.
Right. Now, the streaming space seems to be getting a bit more crowded. You've got Netflix, Stan, Binge, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and now CBS has brought out Paramount Plus. At what point do you think we reach saturation or peak streaming?
I think we might be almost there. Certainly when you look at the investment market's appetite for supporting it and investing in it, there are signs. So we saw in the US, Netflix's share price took a bit of a hit when it talked about how hard it was going to have to carry on investing in content while also seeing subscriber numbers slowing. You saw a similar message when, I think it was just in the last days of being Viacom CBS and is now Paramount, announced similar big investment plans in the local market. We even saw a bit of a downwards blip for Nine when its CEO Mike Sneesby told the market that he felt that Stan was going to need to be investing more in content, although it's since come back up again. But certainly it feels like the appetite is fading a bit. And that recognises the fact that there is only so much content that can be consumed. So there will presumably be some consolidation, and perhaps quite soon. What will start that ball rolling, I don't quite know yet. But I guess our big local indicator will be Foxtel Group has been sending some pretty big signs to the market that it has a taste for an IPO. And the sentiment in the market will be a really interesting signal if they actually get that away on the ASX.
So, Tim, let's turn to what you're doing. Having founded and sold Mumbrella, your new project, Unmade, is still in the startup phase, and you're doing it a little differently. You're embracing a model of transparency, and you're actually telling how many paid subscribers you've got and the process you're going through. Why have you done it like that?
I suppose because I write about the media and marketing industry, it's an interesting media story to tell. A lot of Unmade's readers might work in the publishing or wider media industry. So why wouldn't you? I, as you alluded to sort of much earlier on, back in the day, I was a part of the team that launched Mumbrella, and it was always our policy there to tell the stories of our failures as well as our successes. And we absolutely did have failures. And people found that very interesting to read, because I think you can learn a lot more about that. So for us, the kind of big, I guess, publishing experiment is having a kind of paid subscription component for an online newsletter is still a relatively new model. And we're on the Substack platform, which is, again, very up and coming, but, beginning to find its place in the market. So we are seeing these kind of niches begin to evolve around the world, where small groups of journalists effectively find it as a way of finding an independent, direct voice to their audience. That sometimes it's advertising supported and sometimes it's not. Now, at the moment, my primary revenue stream is paid subscriptions, but in time I don't see advertising as a dirty word at all. So, in time I'll probably pull some of the more kind of traditional levers of B2B publishing. But, I find we're learning so much at the moment just by having that direct relationship with the audience and figuring out new ways. So, hopefully we find new people signing up at unmade.media all the time.
Tim, I'm a subscriber and I'm really enjoying it, both the content and your telling of the story of what you're going through as a startup. I think it's terrific. So thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
Adam, it's always a pleasure.
That was Tim Burrowes, the proprietor of media and marketing industry newsletter Unmade, and this is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Adam Lang. Enjoy your day.